Nothing like a dramatic conclusion to a two-part interview. I'll be right back. Hey everybody, it's Mike from thegraciousguest.org here with you today to round out this conversation. As I mentioned before to folks here, this is not, I don't wear this every day. I'm filming this at the same time that I did last week, whatever. This two-part conversation with Warren Herman was really, really awesome. Warren comes from New York originally and moved around a bit here and there and did his a lot of his undergraduate and then graduate training in different kinds of therapies, all of which were informed very much for him at that time by a very deep interest in and fascination with the New Age movement, broadly speaking, which even at some points led into certain damaging spiritual practices, even some brushes with the demonic. That's a whole other conversation. But for today, what we're doing is focusing on part 2 of this discussion about this notion of a counterfeit experience of wonder and awe, something that's just not quite the fullest, Maybe it's not flat out, evil or demonic or something like that, but it's something, nevertheless, that's not going to really bring us to a full integrated experience of our humanity and our place with God, our relationship with Him. And so part 2 was just a blast to have this chat with Warren. Again, he's affiliated with his ministry you can find on Facebook. It's St. Michael Ministries for Spiritual Deception Education. This is something that's kind of Warren's bailiwick based on his own experience of a very earnest, well-intentioned pursuit of truth and beauty and goodness, but which, when not correctly sort of configured or not adequately configured to this relationship with God and how God made us, can lead to all sorts of damaging things as well. So Warren brings a real sense of a personal experience with this and a real love and hope to see all our brothers and sisters be able to have this authentic experience of what God really wants to call us to. So I hope you really enjoy this as much as I did. Part 2 of my conversation with Warren Herman on Counterfeit Wonder. Let's take a look. Warren Herman, welcome back. Warren coming from I got to get it right again here, St. Michael Ministries for Spiritual Deception Education. And so I just want to jump right back in here. No, we're not wearing the same clothes, that we were last week. This is, of course, part 2 of this, what you all saw last week. But we were leaving off with looking at some of these counterfeit wonders, which, isn't, of course, meant as a bludgeon to anyone who might be interested in these sorts of things or might be captivated by them, but we're trying to make the case here, and Warren's doing a very good job, I think, so far at trying to show how, even if you have something or you have maybe an aspect of the truth, or you're kind of, there's a human inclination here toward wonder and beauty and truth and goodness, but sometimes we're taking an exit ramp before we've reached where we're supposed to go. Or
absolutely, that's a great way to put it.
It's like that we're not at the destination and we're ready to kind of stop here, and it's
right.
Like no. This is signposts. All of sacramental theology in the Catholic tradition, of course, is meant to here's this tangible thing where here and now the infinite God is meeting me in a tangible way, but this isn't the end. With the Eucharist is a slightly different sort of category of its own, of course, but. Signposts of wonder, signposts that point us to a destination, point us to an ultimate reality that God's seeking to fulfill. So now we're going to shift gears here. I don't know if you want to pick up where we left off with that and kind of work our way into some of these, from a Catholic Christian standpoint, what are some maybe, the next step, so to speak, or maybe a fuller experience of this wonder and awe?
All right, so I think that let's just throw a few things out there for the listeners and just give them some things to chew on. And these are really good things, something I've really just begun to do is just to kind of look at Ignatian spirituality in the Catholic tradition, and some things that we should just throw out there that'll point us in the right direction of finding authentic wonder. Is this one phrase that was really seemed to be put out a lot by Saint Ignatius, which was "age quod agius," basically, which is do what you're doing. Mm-hmm. This is very much in line with the sensibility of what we might call the modern world mindfulness, but but there's a way in which it has a greater fullness, coming from this sacramental perspective that you mentioned. so doing what we're doing is a big important part of this thing. Also, Ignatian spirituality always guides us to try to find God in all things. And that's what we're trying to do here when we have authentic wonder, is try to find God in all things. And so those are some just things to kind of throw out there as, as ways that people can kind of latch onto those things coming from our Catholic faith, and just seeing, seeing some things here, because what I think we should do is when we wrapped up on our last segment, we talked about kind of the different levels of, what those counterfeit philosophies were like. And I think maybe we'll just run through real quick at the beginning,
sure, please, yeah.
what it might look like to maybe use all those faculties in a way that, allows them to all work together, sure, and work with God. So,
there's an integration. Is that a good word?
Yes,
there? This,
absolutely.
I'm not just a mind. I'm not just emotions, like this psychosomatic union, I'm not a soul trapped in a body. So would it be fair to say, just as you go into this here, that this is, our goal is to try to adequately address the totality of the human person in this sort of thing? Okay.
And the most shocking thing, and I said this, to one of my friends who he was talking to me about, my experience in the New Age. Mm-hmm. And, there's, he interviewed me about what I, went through with that. Yeah. And I said the only way actually to meet the goals of the New Age movement, the only way to actually be holistic, the only way to actually be like New Agey and holistic is what I've discovered as being Catholic. Because really the New Agey stuff is divisive.
Sure.
The New Agey stuff says I am my true self and I'm not my false self. Catholicism integrates us, as you said, and it allows us to have an integrated experience. So what might that look like? So it might look like I'll just run through, I'll run through what I did before the podcast. I'm sitting here at my computer, and I'm nervous in my belly because I'm trying to come up with all these things and rework the whole outline of what I'm going to say, right before it's happening. So my son was like, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. Like, I'm trying to talk about how to be calm, as the Catholic person, doing this. This doesn't make sense at all. So then I sat down and I just, I paid attention to it. Mm-hmm. And then I said, so that was almost like that step of mindfulness, just watching it, noticing it. But then I said, hey, like there's nervousness in my belly. So now my mind is getting into it. My intellect is activated. And then I said, then I imagined Jesus, like God's with me. Like, I was like, oh, what am I worried about? Even just for a second, like this is silly, And then my feelings respond a little, this is silly. Like, why am I worried? Jesus is here, he's with me, like what? And then you maybe say a prayer, whatever, and you move, or you think about that God is with you. You reflect back to other ways God is with you, and then by the time you know it, you just like, that's a very simple experience, and maybe that's the best way to put it out there. But you used all the faculties in like 1 second. Sure. You used the awareness, you used the imagination, you used the intellect, you used the will, you used the prayer abilities. Everything got activated. That's what we're really what we're saying here. And I think that this is something that I've really been honing in on in different ways, is this idea that it's really all about the truth of who we are as a human person. Like, that's what makes Catholicism universal and makes the kind of the gospel and the demands of Christ universal, because the tradition is saying what's true about being human and saying what brings us to full aliveness, and allowing us not to take the exit ramp and wonder at ourselves or wonder at some created thing, but to use all these things on this like grand highway, which we could almost say is the narrow gate, the narrow way. We got to follow that highway and and don't take the off ramps, and use this to look at the beauty of God and what He's done, and don't ignore creation. Don't ignore your awareness. Don't ignore yourself. It's this sacramental understanding that we're finding God in all things, that we can do what we're doing, that we can see the beauty around us, that we can enjoy the wonder of life. But it's through aiming at God.
Do you think too that, because I'm wondering here, in different ways, but with Hinduism and Buddhism, of course, which factor very prominently, among other things, into some of these more New Age spiritualities and some of these therapeutic practices, it's like the start point. The foundation, I feel like, is so important, because they do not. It's not Mike being judgmental. It's they do not approach anything from the standpoint of a divinely willed, a providentially sort of arranged universe. It's what you've got karma, you've got cycles, you've got there's all these different kinds of notions, but absent, I think, from all of them is any notion of a single, a single intellect, will, heart, this Trinitarian understanding of all of creation goes out from the Lord, and that he's wanting to draw it back to himself, chiefly us. And so I almost wonder, I don't really know what I'm asking, I almost wonder, that seems like that has to be a huge piece of this, because if you approach everything as if basically the be-all, end-all is one form or another of enlightenment, that I feel like that's fundamentally a subjective experience. And that, yes. Like, I love what Lewis says, C.S. Lewis, when he talks about, you might invite the Lord in, I'm paraphrasing, you might invite the Lord in just to fix some leaky pipes, but he'll do it, but that's not, he's not just going to stop there. Like, he has a much bigger, glorious plan, and we get afraid, and we don't want to, like, I'm just here, and I want to tap into these experiences, but I don't want to change. Right. I don't want to admit, and that's the thing with it was Kabat-Zinn, I think. Was it John?
Yeah.
Kabat-Zinn? Because the whole feature with mindfulness, again, of the non-judgmental aspect. Like, in the like, it's non-judgmental. Well, what if I need to judge myself a little bit?
Yes.
And
yes.
What if
yes.
I'm doing things that are objectively sinful? And
yes.
So that's a long way of just asking maybe what your thoughts on some of that might be.
Yes. It's something that's amazing. It's funny that, sometimes those Catholic things they send things in the mail, like to my great aunt, who sends some donation. They get hundreds of like prayer books. One of them was from Padre Pio, and he said, in mental prayer, it was amazing just to hear this quote, like, in mental prayer, we order our conscience and moderate our impulses. It was part of the quote, and it's like, so think about how beautifully psychological that is. Like, you could almost say that's like him basically doing Freud right there with the superego, and the id, or literally the conscience is the superego. Yeah, and he's like, but he's doing it with God. He's using his ego and using it with the ultimate God ego to moderate and deal with his conscience and get everything in the right order so the person is integrated. So how does that connect to what you were just talking about? Well, that was just something that randomly popped in as a result of what you said. But because my mind is obviously wandering, not wondering. No.
We're doing all of it.
So we're doing all of this at the same time. But something that's very important, like you mentioned John Kabat-Zinn and the non-judgmental thing. What the problem is that you use, in a lot of these other methods where you get the counterfeit wonder, you use, like in Buddhism, in Buddhist meditation, you use the faculties, use all of them, but you aim them down. You're aiming them all at the awareness faculty. So in Buddhism, I might imagine where my food came from, but I'm using it to think to only to focus on the sensation of eating.
Okay.
So I'm using the imagination to point down at the awareness, rather than I see something, I imagine about it, I then climb up to the intellect, I then go toward God with prayers. Like, I'm aiming all these other things. Or I may even invoke, in Tibetan Buddhism, I may invoke a Buddha or a celestial being, a bodhisattva, to give me more power in the insight. So I'm even doing my prayers to get more awareness. Like, everything is aiming down. Like, all the other things that should be all aiming up are aiming down. So it's not, and that's why there's such a similarity between the different faiths.
Is it almost like, because I've heard, we just had a meeting the other day, some overview of some Buddhist notions and stuff, and it was, but that's not exactly what you were just saying with the bodhisattva, as far as, like, it's not so much about, like, intercession to a saint, for example, for helping to, fill me, or, like to hopefully fill me with God's grace, which is always this lifting up into His will, into His plan. This seems more like it like maybe an infusion, if I'm saying that right, like an infusion into the here and now of this, like, divine power, or almost like accessing the Force in Star Wars kind of thing, right? Where it's still coming back to me, right?
Yeah, there can be many ways of thinking about there could be many ways of, like, trying to draw that distinction or give language to that type of distinction, and and that was an interesting way of doing it. It's like, there is a lot of and something else that you mentioned in there was um, there is that sense, even we mentioned a little bit of C.S. Lewis. He said, we want to believe in an impersonal God because we don't want like there to be someone on the other end of the rope who's going to make demands morally on us,
Right.
And that goes into that non-judging problem with mindfulness. So it's good not to freak out when a thought comes in. Like, don't freak out when the thought. It's like that's something that we all could learn not to freak out. Like, oh no, there's a bad thought. Like that's not going to help. But then turn your attention somewhere else, or notice it. But then, like something that I've thought about, and this is just, and a lot of, and it's just so we listeners understand, a lot of this we're just kind of doing this just as education. This is not therapy. This is not this is not like, don't use any of this. Like I mean, think about this, apply this, in rational ways with all the ways you do things in your life. If this is applying to your meditation practice, of course, of course, if you're a Catholic and you're practicing Buddhist meditation, you might think, all right, yeah, I should start adding some imagination, some intellection, some will, some other things, so it becomes a type of mental prayer. You want to go into that but if you're like doing this in a therapeutic context, don't tweak things with your therapist, but make do things in harmony with your faith. This is important. Because it also, the thing is that these things ultimately damage. They ultimately damage the human person because, like you said, they leave a person. They damage how the faculties function. But they also lead us to sin. They lead us not to repent. They lead us not to see, like you were saying. Maybe there are ways I should judge myself, but we never judge ourselves in like beat myself up in the corner.
Yeah.
That's not the way. So we shouldn't beat ourselves up in the corner, but we should say, "Oh God, I hurt you. I hurt you, God. I hurt you. Like God who loves me and died for me, I hurt you. Like that's not good. Like, or I hurt someone who's also made in the image and likeness of God. I hurt someone who's like a person like me who's saddened by what I did. That's how we should think about this. It's always in relationships. So So, and that's how beautiful, and the thing is, we have to remember that when we have this authentic wonder, and we can live, kind of using our senses, using our imagination, using our mind, using our thoughts, using our prayers, we have the ability to to have the fullness of life, and that's really what God is calling. God says, God says, He's come that we may have life and fullness, and He wants us, and we began, our talk, kind of with that image of, this book, the Lord of the Rings of philosophy, and this is one of my favorite characters ever in the world, Gandalf.
I was hoping we'd get to Gandalf. Yeah.
Yes. And the thing is to remember, one of the most beautiful things, if you read Lord of the Rings, and so if you haven't seen the first episode, this book got me on the path of thinking about wonder. But one of the most amazing things about Gandalf is that he's like this beautifully written, perfect, like Old Testament prophet.
Yeah.
Saint. Like it's like Padre Pio meets like Old Testament prophet.
Didn't Tolkien just flat out say that Gandalf was largely influenced, maybe most of all, by Samuel? Like the the warrior prophet.
I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, but it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Think how powerful. Like, and there's this one line where they go, Pippin is riding with Gandalf after he becomes Gandalf the White, and he's like, he's more joyful, he's more sorrowful. Right. He has the full ray, and he's white. He's the uncreated light. He has he has the light of God and the fullness of humanity. Yeah. And when we live and use all the faculties in relationship with God, it transforms. That's what it's supposed to do.
The servant of the secret fire, doesn't he say?
Yeah, that's the greatest thing. I mean, and if that's not the uncreated light, I don't know what is. It's like
the Holy Spirit through and through, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's an amazing line. I mean, I don't know how Tolkien thought of that. I mean, Lord of the Rings is not divinely inspired, but that's like...
But it's like... It's the next best thing. Yeah. It's like
but it's amazing. But the thing is, that's what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be a servant of the secret fire. We're not supposed to be a servant of that counterfeit beauty of ourselves.
Right.
Like we have to have a fire on the candle. Don't say, hey, this candle is really nice and white and pure looking. No, it's supposed to be a flame. It's supposed to be a light. That light, not the white candle. Like, so a lot of these things are just looking at us. And and it's not that there's and you mentioned all these different strivings, and all these different traditions. we have, like I was looking at things about Sufism the other day in
Yeah.
Islam,
Yeah.
where there's these states where they get into a thing called fana, which is just like
It's
enlightenment.
fascinating. Yeah, it
Yeah, yeah.
really is
But it's
fascinating.
like enlightenment.
Yeah.
But the thing is, but it's like enlightenment turned the other way because it's still almost. I mean, a lot of times, I mean, obviously God can do what He will with whoever.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the thing is but there's a problem because a lot of times what can happen is you can get like into a place where you're in the created love of God, or you're experiencing yourself. There's all different ways to mess it up. And you can mess it up big time in Christianity too. Like it's not like you're safe when you
Right.
start doing the Christian techniques. So the thing is, like the real important thing is to be reading the saints, having spiritual direction, like really thinking about this stuff because you can mess up. Like there's all this stuff. It requires such discernment because again, we are sinful. We want to be pure. We want to be better. We're always willing to say, oh, like I'm so special. I'm having this spiritual experience. We need to really be careful because we're so sneaky. Like we're sneaky little things, we're sneaky little things, and we have to be careful. We have to really do these things sensibly. And it take, so that's, I think, a thing that we can kind of, and I think we could kind of open it now to some questions or some thoughts, because I think there are ways, in the Christian tradition, that we see things like, and I'll briefly mention something like, there's an organization, the World Community of Christian Meditation,
Right.
which, that one does a mantra practice, which is really like a mantra practice. Like it's not
Like legit,
it's
yeah.
not, yeah. It's like they repeat. They're Christian, but they're repeating it at the level of mind, and then that makes trouble because then you get states where you think you're really high up, and you think you're higher than you're at. Or you do things like centering prayer, where then you're like dropping it into awareness a little bit more. I mean, there's differences. All these techniques have differences, but you can go into like this premature silence. And even amazingly, like centering prayer, like in one of the books, like in the back of the book, they're like, oh, and you can also do the standard repetition practice. They know the difference between the two. I'm like, guys, like if you know the difference between the two practices, like do the one.
Yeah.
Like, so it's like there's these ways in which you can get sidetracked. And I think really, there's even another practice called gratefulness. There's an organization, gratefulness.org, where it's again, it's not realizing
There's a bunch of
that
TED Talks on that.
yeah, but it's not that the thing is that you're not realizing the sacramental character. You're still like you're not taking that, you're not using it as a springboard. You're still really doing the mindfulness. You're still really like using it all like that. There's twists in these things, and probably yeah, so those are some of the things that have twists in them,
Well, because I think a common theme maybe with all of that is again, and I want to keep re-emphasizing that we're not harboring any ill will or ill charity towards anyone,
not.
because I think everybody's on to something here. But I think the idea here is, and I think you and I spoke on the phone about this. I almost forgot to write it down, but maybe we could, in our last couple minutes, maybe start to get at this whole distinction between the gift and the giver.
Absolutely.
And this, that we've been talking a lot about the if I understand it right here, that a lot of these different methods and these methods that have worked their way, into Christian circles are perhaps even doing a very good job at highlighting the gift or the gifts, within the created order, but we're missing often that step that is essential. It's not a side thing. That's supposed to project us to a relationship with the giver himself.
Absolutely.
So just maybe on that we could.
Yeah, and I think that
on that a little bit,
we can kind of tie it in with that, because I think that ultimately, and I think that it's very interesting, because when we use all the Saint Athanasius says, I think the glory of God is a human fully alive.
Sure, yes.
Basically, so paraphrase. When we use all the parts of ourselves, we end up talking to God, because when we use all of them in the fullest possible way, we become, again, servants of the secret fire. We become, we come into relationship with God, and and there is that element where you have, you do have, as you said, there's a beauty in all these different areas, but if we don't orient them all into the right way of doing it and use all the parts of ourselves, we miss out on who we are really meant to be. We miss out on the fullness of our lives. We miss out on the fullness of what God is offering us. So the thing is, it's not like, and it's a beautiful thing to be able to say, everyone's invited to the banquet.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's invited to the Eucharistic feast. We're trying to give people the greatest possible gift. We're trying to give people the gift that is the giver.
Mm-hmm.
When the most holy Eucharist, we receive the most high God, like who is like in heaven in his resurrected body. Like he's up there
Yeah.
doing his at the right hand of the Father, and then we receive him into ourselves.
Yeah.
And then he's inside our soul. Like,
Here
and
and
he's
now. Yeah.
literally here and now. And it's
Yeah.
all happening. And that's what everyone's invited to. That's what everyone's invited to in Catholicism, is to be able to become the full version of who they were meant to be, to have that full emotional range,
Yeah.
to have all their faculties become alive, to be able to experience the wonder not only of the gifts, but the wonder of that giver who is beyond anything we're ever going to think of, or like eye has see that. Here's the
Right.
difference: eye has not seen, ear has not heard the
Right.
things that God has prepared for those who love Him. And the thing is, when we only use our senses, when we only use what the eye has seen, when the ear has heard, we go off into the created stuff. But there is something, there is a giver who we see through the gifts, so we can jump off the gifts toward. But we're meant to, we're in the Catholic tradition, we're meant to be embodied, and that's why we use all the faculties. And but it's meant to call us and call everyone to the fullness of the wonder of life.
And I think, and we're gonna have to kind of wrap it up here for now. We're gonna talk more, I'm sure. I'm definitely gonna have you back on, but that's maybe a good place to end as far as just the call to faith. Because an act of faith is not checking my brain at the door. Faith is a decision that I'm going to go beyond this line where I'm comfortable, because I trust the one calling me over it. So, Warren, thank you so much for coming on. And like I said, definitely have to catch up again in the not too distant future. Very interesting stuff. A lot more to talk about. I have a lot of questions.
Yay. Well, thanks for having me, and
Yeah.
thank you for inviting me on, and thank you for giving me this
Absolutely.
opportunity to reflect. Even to wonder myself about this subject, to think about it, and to
Yeah.
think about this way. That we can, because we don't want to let our minds wander.
Right.
We want to wonder at the one who created everything, at all that He's made, and be the people that He wants us to be.
Amen. Well said. Well, thanks again so much.
Thanks for having me.
Well, and there you have it. And like I was telling Warren when we were talking on the phone about all of this, and I just said, it's funny. I had so many questions come up, questions that were answered, but in that conversation with him, there were so many other questions that came up that I didn't anticipate, that we're definitely going to have more conversations with Warren in the future about a whole host of different issues, different topics. I want to have him come back on and talk about, a little more in depth about certain, Catholic or if you're not Catholic, just generally speaking, Christian meditation options, different ways to approach this. We don't, speak ill of anybody here. What we're really trying to get to is what is a truly, fully adequate approach to, to meditation, to prayer, to growing in the kind of thing we really are, and trying to avoid anything, any practice, any mentality, any ideology, whatever it might be, that, might be leading us into a false understanding of the kind of thing we are. I mean, if I think I'm just a brain, if I think I'm just a mind beyond just a brain, like let's take it up a notch, so to speak. Brain's this organ, but if I have even a more sort of esoteric, kind of bigger picture notion of being a mind, but that's it, then you can see those philosophies could become very, very appealing that seem to suggest, or flat out suggest, that that's all I am. That there is no legitimate involvement whatsoever in my existence that my emotions play, But if I only focus on emotions, if I only focus on feelings, if I only focus on pleasurable experience, well, that very easily in short order can lead into just full-on hedonism, where there's a rejection potentially of any notion of objective truth, of objective responsibility, of a morally good ascetic sense of sacrifice, of sacrificing something that's in itself good, but for a greater good. So, this is all the muddy stuff that we can get into as human beings, and we have all through history. We do all over the world. The Catholic Church is very clear that God wants to save all men and women, all people, all throughout the world, all through history, and what he has done is he has most fully revealed his plan and given us the surest means of salvation through his church. Does that mean that people who aren't card-carrying members of the Catholic Church or even Christianity broadly can't be saved or somehow doomed? Well, no. They can be saved, but we all, Catholics, other Christians, all people, atheists, whoever you are, the only way you can be saved is on God's terms, And he's perfectly just, he's perfectly merciful, and a lot of the confusion is over what salvation means. It's not just some arbitrary thing. So these are all topics we'll explore in other programs. These are the things that are in the background and kind of underscoring, undergirding everything that we explore here on the Gracious Guest Show. So anyway, hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Please give me some feedback, comments below. Please like the video, follow the channel if you're on YouTube, like this podcast if you're listening to the audio version of it, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff. Please spread the word so we can grow what we're doing here. And I especially would appreciate if you guys would get in touch with me through the website, thegraciousguest.org, with any suggestions you might have regarding future topics, future guests, people that I could potentially bring on here and have these conversations of real consequence, hopefully. So God bless you all. Take care. And until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.